Now, I want to talk about this recent story regarding Juice Wrld and how they did him dirty. You might have heard or seen something about this. The other day, Juice Wrld's highly anticipated posthumous album, The Party Never Ends, got released. It's his 5th studio album and supposedly his final one, which is crazy to think about. I don't know how true that is, but it's what they're saying. This album has been getting teased for quite some time. There's been a lot of hype building up to it. Fans have been waiting on this one for sure. Now, the album ended up dropping the other day, but before we get into the album itself, let's talk about the cover, because this was a really big controversial moment in the rollout. The cover got announced about a week before the release, and honestly, it was met with a lot of negative reactions. People were saying it didn't look professional, which, looking at it, is a fair critique. Then there's a 6-pack abs on the cartoon version of Juice, which a lot of people thought looked unrealistic and unnecessary. Overall, this cover was, let's just say, not it. Now, on another note, we also have to talk about the rollout, because it was a bit janky to say the least. This is something Juice fans were pointing out ever since the rollout started. The rollout for The Party Never Ends has been messy, to put it mildly. One of the key promotional strategies was the Fortnite collab. They added Juice Wrld skins to the game, which, don't get me wrong, is huge. Not every rapper, especially someone who has passed, gets an opportunity like that. It's a pretty big deal, but outside of that, the rollout just didn't feel cohesive. Songs were being added and removed from the album last minute, like some Juice Wrld fans were mentioning on Twitter, just days before its release. On a serious note, The Party Never Ends rollout is really bad, Riley said on Twitter. It's carried by the Fortnite collab, which isn't enough. The cover still hasn't been picked and songs are being added and removed last minute, just days before the release. People have been waiting years for this. So the disorganization of this entire rollout and release left a lot of fans frustrated. Then there's the Tracklist reveal. This caused even more controversy because fans were anticipating certain records to be included, and those records ended up being left out. One song in particular, Rental, which is very popular in the Juice Wrld community, this song was produced by singer and rapper Season, and this is a song the fans have been asking for a very long time. But apparently it didn't get cleared for the project, so once again, fans were left disappointed. Now, when the album finally dropped, it was met with a lot of mixed reactions. First of all, like we said earlier, many of the Juice Wrld songs that fans have been begging for were nowhere to be found. Juice has so many famous snippets floating around the internet, and the demand for those songs has been building up for years. Fans were expecting this album to be delivered on that front, and it just didn't. Then there's the quality of the album in itself. I've seen a lot of mixed reactions, but for Juice Wrld standards, it was actually kind of low if you ask me. It didn't feel up to par with his earlier releases. The mixing and overall sound of the project was also heavily criticized. Fans felt like it was rushed, unpolished, and not a proper representation of Juice's artistry. At this point, a lot of people are convinced that his record label is actively ruining his legacy. That's the narrative I keep seeing, and honestly, it's hard to disagree when you see the backlash. Even diehard fans who've been there since day one aren't supporting this release. That speaks volumes. Juice Wrld is not the first rapper whose legacy has been mishandled though. We've talked about this topic in depth over the last few years, and we've seen it happen with other artists like Pop Smoke and XXXTentacion. Both of their legacies have been, let's just say, poorly handled, whether it's rushed albums, unnecessary collaborations, or decisions that don't align with who they were as artists. The pattern is very clear. This is the same movie playing out all over again. So honestly, I'm not surprised to see this happening with Juice WRLD's legacy. Granted, I'm not as emotionally moved by the missteps, if you will, probably because I'm just not as invested as the day one fans. That said, I'll admit I'm pretty disappointed listening to this album. Personally, I tuned out of most things related to Juice WRLD's name a long time ago. It's just not the same when other people are representing him, especially when he's not here to have a say. I remember when Juice first came in the game, this young rapper singing his pain away. From the start, it was clear that he was special. Definitely a broken soul, also one who was leading the lost souls. Someone who carried a lot of heavy things inside of him. But the beauty of Juice Wrld was that he was able to channel all that pain into his music. I always respected Juice Wrld for his honesty, for the way he opened up and let the world see his struggles. He was a brave young man, extremely talented, and a light for so many kids who saw themselves in his music. For those who don't know, Juice Wrld recorded thousands upon thousands of songs while he was alive. The music we've heard doesn't even scratch the surface of the work he put in. And this is where the problem lies. This is how the music industry is taking advantage of a lot of artists. If you're not familiar with how record deals work, let me break it down. When an artist signs a contract with a label, the terms are almost always heavily one-sided against the artist. We've talked about this before, but to make it clear, most artists sign contracts that last in perpetuity. What that means is they're essentially signing away their masters forever. So whether you're lucky enough to live to 60 years old or tragically pass away at 21 like Jared Higgins, professionally known as Juice Wrld, the corporations own your work for an eternity. In Juice's case, from what I know, his family doesn't have any control or say in what the record label does with his music. The people who loved him the most, who truly understood his vision and his artistry, don't have a voice in how his legacy is handled. Instead, the people who are in control are often looking out for their own interest more than his. And this is why we end up in situations like these where a young, incredibly talented artist like Juice Wrld passes away so young, and the posthumous projects released under his name don't hold a candle to the work he put out while he was alive. It's a tale as old as time. It's a movie we've seen before, and unfortunately it keeps playing out. The question is, when will it stop? When will the industry start treating artists with the respect they deserve, both in life and in death? The sad truth is it's never gonna change. I don't really think it will. There's too much of a financial incentive for things to be this way. You know exactly what you're gonna get if you put your hand on a stove. You're gonna get burnt. So it's up to the artist to be as smart as possible by thinking way ahead into the future and not getting burnt. Now these things become very complicated when the artist in question ends up dying at a young age. No one plans to die young, that's a fact. Juice wasn't planning to pass away at the age he did. The circumstances on a private jet ingesting those pills led to things ending the way they did. Yes, it was a decision, but it's so much more complicated than that, and honestly, I don't think this is the moment we should dive into that conversation. What I do want to talk about is that when an artist, just like in this case, isn't here anymore, there can be a situation where their legacy is handled the right way. You might be asking how? Well, let's just say it doesn't always have to be like this. Take a look at Mac Miller, for example. Mac Miller, who tragically passed away at the age of 26, is a textbook example of how an artist's legacy should be handled. The way Mac's legacy has been preserved speaks volumes about the environment he had around him. Clearly, there was a lot of love, care, and respect for his artistry. I'm pretty sure that Mac Miller also took some steps contractually to personally ensure that if he wasn't here, his work, his name, and his likeness would still be represented in the right way. If that wasn't the case, there's no way everything related to Mac Miller would have this overwhelmingly positive tone to it. An artist's environment is crucial. For someone like Juice Wrld, I can't fully speak on the specific people he had around him or their character, aside from Ali, Lottie, but yeah, we're not gonna go down that path right now. But one thing I can say for certain is that Juice didn't have the best environment around him, and that environment reflected in his mental state. He was deep into addiction, threw a lot of drugs in his system, and that was apparent even in interviews. I'm sure you've seen those clips of Juice dozing off mid-conversation.
I want you to describe that single and that track that we're playing right now.
It's heartbreaking. It tells you so much about what he was going through internally and the lack of a truly productive environment to help him navigate those struggles. At the end of the day, an artist's surroundings plays a significant role in their mental health and their career. Juice WRLD's tragic story is a reminder of what happens when those pieces aren't in place, and unfortunately, his legacy is being mishandled in a way that reflects that. It didn't have to be this way though. When an artist is in this kind of mental state, the last thing they're thinking about is what happens to my legacy when I'm not here. It's almost like they're in survival mode. You can't plan for the future when you're just trying to make it through the present moment. And that's not unique to artists. It applies to every aspect of life. When you're consumed by what's happening right now, planning for the long term feels impossible. So this conversation about why Juice WRLD is being done dirty, honestly, it's way deeper than most people realize. It's way deeper than, oh, the people who are in charge of his music don't know what they're doing. It's a matter of preparing for your life and what comes after. But here's the thing, when you're in a vulnerable place mentally, dealing with addiction, stress, or whatever demons you're facing, it's hard to think about those things. And unfortunately, that's when the people around you, i.e. the environment you're in and the contracts you've signed, come into play. Juice WRLD wasn't in the headspace to worry about his legacy after he was gone. I mean, how could he be? He was carrying so much weight, so many struggles in the moment. And because of that, there was no preparation for what his career would look like if the unthinkable happened. And now here we are seeing the aftermath. This is why this conversation goes beyond just blaming the label or the people in charge of his music. It's about the system that allows this to keep happening. Artists, especially young ones, are thrown into a machine that doesn't prioritize their well-being or their long-term legacy. And when they're in survival mode, they're not in a position to fight for those things either. So while it's easy to criticize what's happening with Juice's posthumous releases, and trust me, there's plenty to criticize, it's important to understand that there's deeper issues at play here. This is a systematic problem, one that starts with lack of support for artists while they're alive, because by the time they're gone, it's already too late. And that's why we're having this conversation right now. My goal is to let artists and the public know the ugly realities of how things can end up when you're not in charge of your own legacy. If you don't set up things properly, others will do it for you. And they'll do it in a way that serves their interest, not yours. You want to make sure you set things up in a way where even when you're not here, you can trust that the right people are handling your work and your name. Because here's the harsh truth. You're often more valuable to the music industry dead than alive. At the very least, when you're gone, you're no longer around to fight for yourself or challenge the narrative. The saddest part about this conversation though is that this is supposedly Juice WRLD's final album. That's crazy to think about, but honestly, I'm not sure how much I believe it. Juice's estate reportedly has thousands of songs in the vault. If anything, this might just be the last album for the next few years. Record labels in general play the long game. They're not thinking about the next 5 months, they're thinking about the next 5 decades. And here's a theory I have about posthumous albums in general, and it applies here as well. A lot of times when these albums come out, they're purposely disappointing in terms of quality, and I think that's because the label is saving the best for the last. From the fans' perspective, they're hearing an album that could have been so much better because they know what the artist was capable of. But from the corporation's perspective, they're giving you just enough to keep you hooked for future releases. And because they own this music in perpetuity, they can also release it in perpetuity. His music will always be the content that brings revenue back to the Juice WRLD estate. 30 years from now, when today's Juice WRLD fans are pushing 40 or older with 2 kids and a house in the suburbs, these record labels are still counting on releasing his music, that's for sure. And they'll hold on to the catalog until the perfect moment because they know it's a never-ending cash cow. Artists like Juice WRLD, especially those who come from a generation fueled by social media, are in a unique position. Since Juice didn't have time to become a legacy act in the mainstream, his music will always be the content that brings revenue back to the Juice WRLD estate. In comparison, look at someone like Michael Jackson. He's the definition of a legacy act. His brand and name will always bring in incredible amounts of revenue solely based on his existence. Now I know this might sound like a crazy comparison to make, but it perfectly highlights the point I'm trying to make about how an artist's legacy is handled. Michael Jackson's legacy was built over decades of groundbreaking work, iconic performances, and a team that knew how to preserve and amplify his name even after he passed. It's why his estate still generates hundreds of millions of dollars every year. His catalog, his likeness, and his influence are so deeply embedded into pop culture that he's untouchable. And someone like Juice WRLD, who comes from a completely different era, he's in a completely different position. Since Juice didn't have time to become a legacy act in the mainstream, think about it, the Juice WRLD brand over the next 10 to 20 years will likely generate tens of millions of dollars. And I'm being very generous when I say that. His catalog alone pulls in a massive amounts of money every year, even now. The labels know this, and that's why they're counting on fans to stick around for the day when they start releasing more unreleased tracks. Overall, it's just sad because I really wish things could have been different. But let's not sit around praying for the music industry to change. Let's become that change. Artists need to plan for their future. They need to ensure that in the unfortunate event of their untimely death, the right people are in charge of their name, their brand, and their art. If they don't, they're gonna become another money grab for the industry. And we also need to focus on switching up these contracts because we all know who exactly they benefit. Anyway, they're doing Juice WRLD dirty, man. I can't even lie. Appreciate you for making it all the way till the end, by the way. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. And if you're new here, my name is Blacky Speaks. Nice to meet you. Consider subscribing and welcome to the family. What do you guys think about this topic? Do you feel like Juice WRLD is being done dirty? Let me know in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys on the next one, okay? Peace. I'm out.